They didn't like the fact that Trump was indicted for mishandling highly sensitive classified documents, so they claimed that Trump declassified them with his mind.
Chair will now recognize himself for an opening statement. The New York County District Attorney's Office began investigating President Trump in 2018, 6 years ago, 2018. But it wasn't Alvin Bragg, it was Cy Vance. Southern District of New York, months later, concluded its investigation into payments made by Michael Cohen and determined no charges should be brought against President Trump. Of course, while this was going on, Alvin Bragg was running for the job, vowing to go after President Trump, bragging about the number of times he had already sued President Trump. Mr. Bragg ultimately wins and takes office in January of 2022. First thing he did, the Day One memo. 10-page policy memo to his staff instituting progressive, soft-on-crime, anti-victim policies. Felony armed robbery charges get reduced to misdemeanors. He instructed his staff, except for homicides, not to seek prison sentences for individuals. And guess what came next? Rising crime. During that first year, violent crime in Manhattan was at an all-time high. New York City saw a 23% surge in major violent crimes. In fact, we heard from some of these victims of crime at our field hearing up in New York City 13 months ago. A mother whose son's murderers were allowed to walk free because of Alvin Bragg's soft-on-crime prosecutors. A bodega owner who was violently attacked, yet Bragg's office initially charged him. And finally, a father whose son was attacked in Times Square because he was Jewish. And Bragg offered one of his assailants a sweetheart slap-on-the-wrist deal, even though he had previous run-ins with the law, showed no remorse, and was arrested while out on bail. A few weeks after this Day One memo, Alvin Bragg told one of his prosecutors, Mark Pomerantz, quote, he could not see a world in which he would indict President Trump and call Michael Cohen as a prosecution witness. That's right, after campaigning on going after the former president, Alvin Bragg gets into office and realizes the case against President Trump is ridiculous. And that's why the Southern District of New York didn't bring it. That's why his predecessor, Cy Vance, didn't bring it. Everybody knew Michael Cohen couldn't be trusted. In fact, his former lawyer sat right in this room and told us, you can't believe what this guy says. Michael Cohen's lied to Congress, he's lied to the FBI, and he's lied to court. It's not often you can lie to all three branches of government and yet become the star witness in a prosecution of a former president. Now, what caused Alvin Bragg to do the 180-degree turn? What caused him to change? That special assistant district attorney, Mark Pomerantz. The guy Alvin Bragg had told he could not see a world in which he would indict President Trump and call Michael Cohen as a prosecution witness. That guy resigned in protest of Mr. Bragg's decision not to go after President Trump. And his fellow assistant district attorney, Kerry Dunn, resigned as well. And they leaked their resignation letter to the New York Times. And after that, the left begins their pressure campaign on Mr. Bragg, and suddenly the, quote, zombie case is resurrected. And also, never forget, in November of 2022, President Trump announced he was a candidate for president of the United States. And just a few weeks later, Alvin Bragg hires former senior Biden Justice Department official Matthew Colangelo to come up and run the prosecution. Someone who had a history of taking on President Trump and his family's businesses and had also worked for the New York State Attorney General. Alvin Bragg, the partisan DA that campaigned on going after President Trump, whose newly hired lead prosecutor for the case also had a history of taking on President Trump, had their case now in front of a partisan judge. A judge who had donated to President Biden, who imposed a gag order on President Trump, prevented an expert defense witness from testifying, and also told the jury they didn't need to reach a unanimous decision. And there is the fundamental issue. No one knows what the federal crime is. Bragg and Colangelo bootstrap charges federal prosecutors declined to bring into some kind of never-seen felony. Former Attorney General Robert H. Jackson warned us about rogue prosecutors. Former Attorney General said this in a speech 84 years ago. The speech was titled "The Federal Prosecutor." Applies to all prosecutors, though. Attorney General Jackson laid out a vision for how prosecutors should behave in a fair and just society. He stated, quote, "Therein is the most dangerous power of the prosecutor, that he will pick people that he thinks he should get, rather than pick cases that need to be prosecuted. It is here that law enforcement becomes personal, and the real crime becomes that of being unpopular with the predominant or governing group, being attached to the wrong political views, or in a way of the prosecutor, be in the way of the prosecutor himself. And that is precisely what we have here in this situation. In this situation. Alvin Bragg's prosecution of President Trump was personal, it was based on politics, and it was wrong. And we're going to hear from some expert witnesses today who will give us details into all that. With that, I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we sit here today for one reason and one reason only. House Republicans are willing to do just about anything to protect Donald Trump from the consequences of his actions. On May 30th, a jury of his peers sitting in a state court in Manhattan convicted Donald Trump of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree for paying hush money to conceal information that could have been harmful to his 2016 presidential campaign. Let's see how that all unfolded.
An unprecedented moment in American politics. Former President Trump indicted by a Manhattan grand jury.
Breaking news. It appears for the first time in American history, an American president has been indicted on federal charges.
The Justice Department unsealing the 49-page federal indictment against former President Trump for his handling of classified documents after leaving the White House.
A federal grand jury here in Washington has voted to indict the former president for his efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election.
Former President Trump has been indicted now for a fourth time. The nearly 100-page indictment was unsealed last night in Georgia.
A whopping 91 felony counts in total. 91.
The jury a short time ago alerting the judge it has reached a decision in the Donald Trump hush money trial.
Count 1, guilty. Count 2, guilty. Count 3, guilty.
It's 15 out of 15 so far.
He became very still. He had his arms folded across his chest.
Count 31, guilty. Count 32, guilty.
His face was red. He looked upset. He had a frown on his face.
He's scared. And frankly, he should be.
Guilty on all 34 felony counts.
We arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes to the courtroom doors.
Let me be clear. This trial was fair and just, and allegations to the contrary represent a desperate, evidence-free attempt to shield Trump from accountability. Today, we're going to hear a long list of allegations designed to undermine public faith and confidence in the jury's verdict. Do not be deceived. These are baseless allegations, and we can take them down one by one. First, Republicans claim that Judge Merchan was, quote, handpicked to handle the Trump case because he had donated $35 to Democrats in the past. This is false. Judges are assigned at random in the New York court system. With respect to Judge Merchan's $35 donation, the New York Advisory Committee on Judicial Ethics issued an opinion saying that he need not recuse himself from the case, and there is simply no evidence that any of Judge Merchan's rulings were biased in any way. Second, Republicans claim that the jury's verdict convicting Trump was not unanimous. This is absurd. The jury instructions plainly stated that, quote, your verdict on each count you consider, whether guilty or not guilty, must be unanimous. That is, each and every juror must agree to it, close quote. The verdict was unanimous on each of the 34 counts. Third, Republicans claim that all of Judge Merchan's rulings went against Trump. This is false. In fact, Judge Merchan repeatedly ruled for Trump, including a critical ruling that required prosecutors to prove willfulness under a heightened mens rea standard. Fourth, Republicans claim that Judge Merchan prevented Trump's expert witness from testifying. This is false. Trump's attorneys chose not to call that witness because he could not have testified about underlying questions of law, which is a role solely reserved to the judge. Fifth, Republicans claim that Attorney General Garland secretly, quote, dispatched Matthew Colangelo, a former DOJ attorney who served as the lead prosecutor on the Trump case, to the Manhattan DA's office as part of an elaborate ruse to plant DOJ prosecutors and state-level officers to attack Donald Trump. This is false and utterly absurd. Last week, the Attorney General clearly and unequivocally told Republicans that they are wrong. The Department of Justice has no record of any communication to the contrary, and Republicans have not and cannot produce any evidence whatsoever to support this nonsensical claim. And that's the theme for today. Republican attacks, one after another, lack any basis in truth or fact. My colleagues across the aisle know this, and yet they repeat their attacks ad nauseum because that is the only play left in their playbook. They didn't like the fact that Trump lost in 2020. So, lacking facts or evidence to support their claims, they instead attacked our democratic institutions, basically claiming that the election was rigged and corrupt. They didn't like the fact that Trump was indicted for mishandling highly sensitive classified documents, so they claimed that Trump declassified them with his mind. They didn't like the fact that the FBI had to send in agents to execute a search warrant at Mar-a-Lago because of concerns that Trump would destroy documents, so they claimed that the lawful execution of a search warrant constitutes a raid and a witch hunt. And now they don't like the fact that an impartial jury found Trump guilty not once, not twice, but on 34 separate counts. So they are attacking the judicial process, calling it rigged, corrupt, and pre-cooked, without a shred of evidence to back their allegations. And why are they doing this? Why are they sowing doubt in our system? Why are they using rhetoric that is guaranteed to generate death threats against the judges and jurors and prosecutors and police involved in these cases? For one reason only: to protect the felon. A felon who, I remind you, faces an additional 37 felony counts related to his mishandling of classified documents, 4 federal counts for conspiring to launch a riot on January 6th, and 13 counts in Georgia for conspiring to interfere with the administration of the 2020 election. Within the bounds of our system of laws, there is nothing Trump can do to escape a trial in each of those counts, or to escape a sentence if he is found guilty on any of them. Trump and his allies know this, and so they are moving heaven and earth to undermine the system itself. That includes the attempt by our chairman to reach into the New York case while sentencing is still pending and drag the Manhattan District Attorney before this committee. That demand represents a completely unacceptable abuse of the gavel. It is entirely inappropriate for us to interfere with an ongoing state prosecution, no matter how much blind loyalty you feel you owe to the defendant. It is also an effort that smacks of desperation, and it seems, from the standing of MAGA Republicans these days, that the American public has caught on. Donald Trump has faced a jury of his peers. Nothing can change that. We here will face our constituents in November. We should conduct ourselves accordingly. I thank the witnesses for being here today, and I yield back.